The late summer sun hung low and furious over the western sky, pouring down a red-brown light that seemed to melt the earth itself. The ground split with cracks, heat rising in waves that made the horizon quiver like a warped mirror. Across that land staggered a lone figure, Amara Johnson, 19, her dark eyes carrying both exhaustion and a fragile thread of resolve. She had walked for days without finding a drop of water beyond the dried mud of stagnant pools. Her worn canvas shoes filled with grit that scraped her raw with every step. The pale blue dress, her mother's last gift, was now nothing more than tattered cloth, stained with sweat and dust. Her lips split, her breath ragged, each inhale cutting deep into her chest. To the west, a yellow-brown mass rose in the sky. Amara knew the sign, another dust storm. Memories of crouching in dry pits to escape past storms returned, making her whole body shiver. But here, on the bare expanse, there was no hollow, no rock to crawl into. The wind came first, bitter and sharp with alkali dust. It slapped her face, seared her eyes, forced them shut against the sting. She pulled at the ragged scarf tied at her neck, trying to cover her mouth, but the gale tore it free, lashing it across her face like a whip. The storm came upon her like a pack of invisible beasts, clawing at her slight frame. She fell to her knees, hands clawing at the dirt, dragging herself toward a faint line on the horizon. Maybe a fence, maybe the outline of a roof. One thought pulsed in her head. Without water, without people, death would come for her now. Darkness edged her vision as the storm thickened. Just when she thought she would collapse, a rough hand seized her arm. A man's voice shouted against the wind, "Damn it, someone's out there!" Amara was hauled upright, half dragged more than walking. When her legs gave out, another arm closed around her waist and lifted her clear off the ground. The sour breath of whiskey and sweat against her ear made her shudder. In a blur, a heavy wooden door crashed open. Hinges groaned. She was thrown into a room heavy with the stench of sweat, tobacco, and horse. The door slammed behind, cutting the storm to a dull roar. Inside, a dozen eyes turned on her. 6 or 7 ranch hands sprawled around the bunkhouse, at the card table, on the bunks, sharpening knives. Their hands stilled, their stares fixed. Sun-darkened faces, unkempt beards, eyes bright with curiosity and hunger. The youngest, not yet with a full beard, gave a sharp laugh. "Heaven sent us a stray." A bird blown into the storm. Amara tried to stand, but the room spun. Her scarf slipped, revealing sweat-slick brown skin. She crossed her arms over her chest, pressing back against the wall, her heartbeat hammering. Another man, hair wild, veins raised in his arm, stepped forward. His grin curled as his hand reached for the frayed hem of her dress. Been a long while since a woman set foot in this. Bunkhouse Amara's sob caught in her throat, but her gaze held firm, defiant. She knew her body was weak, but she refused to be prey. Before the man could take another step, a voice cut through the room, low, steady, final. "That's enough." The air shifted at once. The man who had spoken stood in the doorway, needing no shout to command the room. Elias Garrison, the ranch foreman, 35, broad-shouldered, tall, eyes the gray of storm clouds. His coat, heavy with dust, still dripped from the wind, but his stance was straight as stone. He looked at no one but Amara. With one hand, he shoved the younger man back so hard, the fellow stumbled. "This girl needs water, not your filth. Anyone who argues packs his gear and leaves come morning." His words were clipped, unyielding. The men muttered curses, but none dared answer. Amara, near fainting, felt a new hand close on her arm, not the rough grip of drunks, but a hold firm, steady, protective. "Come," Garrison said, quiet enough for her alone. She looked up. Through blurred vision, through grit and tears, her eyes met his. No lust, no disdain. Only a cold steadiness, with something buried beneath it. A vow unspoken, that she would not be harmed while he stood there. Her body leaned into him, breath ragged, but her legs found ground again. Outside, the storm howled to tear the land apart. But within that foul bunkhouse, Amara knew this. She had met the first man who saw her not as lost or lesser, but as human, worthy of protection. And from that glance, her path in the brutal West had turned toward a fate she had never imagined. After pulling her out from the bunkhouse stairs, Elias Garrison led Amara across the yard. The dust storm still roared, but the wind had softened. Evening shadows gathered along the fence lines. Horses shuddered and turned their heads from the grit. At the far end stood a timber house, a lamp burning in its window like the only beacon on this harsh land. Elias said nothing. He only opened the door and guided her inside. Warmth from the hearth spilled out, and Amara's shoulders sank as if a burden had slipped away. In the main room, a man stood at the fire, laying more wood onto the flames. His frame was broad, steady, hair streaked with gray and tousled by wind. At the sound of the door, he turned. Dark brown eyes fixed on the stranger brought in from the storm. Samuel Henderson, owner of the ranch, was in his early 40s, widowed near 5 years. Lines of wear marked his face, carrying the fatigue of too many hard seasons. He knew drought. He knew the sound of gunfire over land disputes. Yet his eyes held a hollow distance, as if always fixed on someone no longer there. His gaze settled on Amara, a young woman, drained to the bone, her dress torn, hair matted with dust, lips cracked. Samuel paused, a crease furrowing his brow. Strangers in a storm seldom meant anything good. "Who is this?" His voice was low, cautious. Elias answered plain. "A girl I dragged in from the wind. Without it, she'd be dead." Samuel did not speak at once. He stepped closer, studying her from head to toe. His look was not the crude hunger of ranch hands, but the weighing glance of a man long used to being deceived. Amara's chest tightened. She tried to speak, to give her name, but her throat was too dry. Only a rasp broke loose. Samuel moved to the kitchen shelf, poured water from a clay jug, and set the cup into her trembling hands. When it nearly slipped, he steadied it, his large hand closing over her thin fingers. "Drink," he said. The cool water slid down her throat like light returned to her body. Tears spilled as she drained it. Samuel turned back to the fire. He set a black pot on the flames, chopped what few vegetables he had, tossed in strips of dried meat. Soon the smell of stew rose, filling the room. The bubbling sound tangled with the storm outside, a quiet defiance, brutality beyond the walls, warmth within. Amara sat in a wooden chair, watching his every move. Each simple act, slicing, stirring, struck her silent. In her short life, no man had ever cooked for her. When he placed the bowl before her, steam blurred her eyes. She lifted the spoon with shaking hands, lips raw against the edge. She ate slowly, as though fearing the food might vanish if she hurried. Samuel sat across the table, arms folded. He did not eat. He only watched. His eyes carried two layers, outwardly wary, the guard of a man afraid to be bound again. Yet beneath, a compassion he could not hide, seeing a young woman struggle over a single meal. Amara felt it. She raised her head, her black eyes meeting his brown. For a breath, silence held them both, broken only by the crackle of fire on the wall. She dropped her gaze, spoon moving again, but her heartbeat raced, not from hunger, but from the weight of that look, a look both distant and safe. When the bowl was empty, she set the spoon down, her hands still trembling. Samuel rose, fetched a wool blanket, and laid it over her shoulders. "Rest," he said, his tone clipped, still dry. "We'll see come morning." Amara clutched the blanket tight. She knew she was nothing more than a stranger, an unexpected burden. Yet the hot stew, the warm cloth, and the guarded sorrow in his eyes planted a small seed of hope. On this unforgiving land, perhaps there was still a place for her. Outside, the storm clawed and raged, but within the house of a widowed man, for the first time in days, Amara felt herself a person again, not a ghost wandering the drought. Morning light slipped through the cracks of the window, thin and golden, spilling across the wooden kitchen, still holding the warmth of last night's fire. Amara stirred awake, rising from the bench where she had slept. Samuel's heavy blanket remained around her shoulders, faint with the scent of pine and smoke. For a moment she thought herself dreaming, sheltered, warmed, safe. Then her eyes found the plain kitchen, and the memory of dust storms and this unforgiving land brought her back. She drew a steady breath and stood. Something pressed within her. She had been given food and shelter, and she would prove herself more than a burden. Her eyes swept over the clutter, greasy plates, unwashed pots, crumbs across the table. She knew such work well, having helped her mother in lean years, and her hands fell into the rhythm with ease. Amara stoked the stove fire, scrubbed the pans, wiped down the table, then set about preparing breakfast. She found cornmeal, salted meat, a few potatoes. Her fingers kneaded dough. Her thin shoulders swayed slightly with the motion of the knife cutting vegetables. The crackle of grease rose, scent of food spreading through the house, mingling with roosters outside and the whinny of horses in the yard. When Samuel stepped into the kitchen, he stopped at the threshold. There stood the young black woman, hair tied neat, bent over a steaming pot. The sight struck him with something both strange and familiar, as though an old hollow in his chest had been touched. Amara startled, then lowered her head. "I only thought I should do something to repay the kindness." Samuel said nothing, only gave a brief nod and moved to the table. His eyes followed her every motion. That gaze left her flustered, yet steadied her somehow. As the smell of food drifted outward, footsteps gathered, laughter, rough voices. Soon groups of ranch hands crowded the doorway, still trading jokes, but when they stepped into the kitchen, the sight stopped them cold. A woman at the ranch table. Such a thing was rare, near unheard of. One bearded man muttered, "Lord, I thought I was still drunk." The others broke into raucous laughter, their eyes all fixed on Amara. She bowed her head, ladling soup into bowls, feigning deafness. But her heart pounded, and her hand shook on the spoon. Among them, Billy, the brash young hand, grinned wide, tapping his fingers on the table, eyes darting over her like she was some scarce prize. "Didn't think the boss so generous," he said loud, for Samuel's ears. bringing in a maid. And a maid like this, I wouldn't mind testing her skill myself. The room erupted in crude laughter, sour with sweat and stale whiskey. Amara froze, nearly dropping the ladle. Heat flared across her face, not from the stove. A chair scraped harsh across the floor. Samuel rose. He did not shout, did not wave a fist. He only stepped forward, his broad frame blotting out the window light. His dark eyes locked Malmum. Billy, voice low and hard as iron. One more word, and you won't set foot on this ranch again. The kitchen fell silent. The smirk on Billy's face stiffened, then broke. He swallowed, muttered a curse, and turned aside, not daring to meet Samuel's stare. The heavy quiet stretched a moment longer. Then Samuel returned to his chair, as if nothing had happened. Amara pressed her lips tight, placing the bowl before him. She said nothing, but her eyes flicked toward him. For that instant, she saw him not only as the master of the ranch, but as a shield, one strong enough to stand between her and the world's cruelty. When Samuel bent to eat, he looked up and caught her gaze. His eyes held no softness, but they carried steadiness, a wordless assurance. Amara's chest tightened, warmth unfurling through her ribs. In that small kitchen, with the clink of spoons and the smell of soup filling the air, Amara felt the faint shape of something like home. Makeshift, fragile yet real. And in that place, Samuel's eyes were the fire that kept her from losing her way. That afternoon, after a day spent cleaning and helping around the ranch, Amara passed by a narrow room at the end of the hall. The door stood ajar, a thin wash of lamplight spilling out, catching the drifting dust like raindrops trapped in air. She hesitated, then pushed gently. Inside, Samuel sat beside an old wooden chest. Its lid lay open, revealing faded belongings. A few women's dresses, a wide-brimmed hat, a worn Bible, and a small photograph yellowed with age. He hadn't noticed her. He held the frame in his rough hands, thumb tracing the weathered wood. In the picture, a blonde-haired woman smiled, her arms around a little girl of about 6. Their faces were caught forever in time, while Samuel's eyes dulled under the weight of memory. Amara cleared her throat softly. Samuel flinched, quickly setting the frame back into the chest, slamming the lid as if to trap the ghosts inside. He turned, shoulders stiff. "You shouldn't be in here," he said, voice dry, tinged with unease. Amara stepped forward, stopping a few paces away. She looked from the chest to him, her voice low. "Your family." Silence held him. At last he nodded, sinking into the chair, his hand gripping his knee. When he spoke, his voice quavered, every word dragging through stone laid heavy on his chest. "She was my wife. And the little one, Ruth. She was frail from the start. That winter, fever took her down in a matter of days. I sent for the doctor, but with snow so deep, no one came in time. I sat at her bedside, listening to her breath weaken, until it was gone." His eyes fixed on the floor. "My wife could not bear it. She followed soon after. Since then, this room's been left untouched." Amara's throat tightened. His loss was not foreign to her. Her parents, too, had been taken by sickness in one harsh summer. The feeling of being left behind, the world collapsing without anyone to hear the cry. That was the same burden Samuel bore. She drew closer, slowly, and laid her hand over his. Warm, trembling. Samuel startled, half pulling back. then stilled, letting it remain. He lifted his eyes to hers, dark, deep, carrying no pity, only complete understanding. "I know," Amara whispered. "I lost mine too, in a season of sickness. There's no one left." A hush fell, broken only by wind brushing at the window. Samuel's hand closed faintly over hers before slipping free, like a man fearing he'd gone too far. His face set again, though his eyes had changed, no longer sealed shut. "You'd best go," he said, voice softer now. "There's supper yet to see to." Amara nodded and stepped back. Yet in her heart, a small light had been kindled. That brief touch, the warmth of it, told her the walls around Samuel had cracked. And through that fracture, the first stirrings of feeling slipped in, like a tender shoot finding soil in parched earth, reaching upward. That afternoon, the sky sank low, as though a giant hand had pressed down upon the plains. Layers of gray cloud piled and twisted, lightning ripping the heavens open. Wind tore across the land, flinging dust and sand, lifting shingles from the horse barn. The ranch swarmed with men shouting, tying down reins, nailing boards across windows, their voices drowned in the roll of thunder. Amara stood in the kitchen, staring through the glass. She had never seen a storm so fierce. The coarse curtain shuddered with every gust. The fire in the hearth faltered, as though ready to die. Her heart raced, not only for those outside, but for herself. Samuel had gone out early to check the herd, his figure swallowed in the rain and wind, leaving the house hollow and cold. Night fell, and the storm only grew. Amara sat on the bench, blanket wrapped around her, unable to sleep. Thunder crashed again and again, rattling the window panes. She shut her eyes, praying the storm would pass, when a knock split the roar. At first faint, then pounding, as if someone meant to break the door in. She jolted upright. For a moment she thought Samuel had returned, but then came the sound of drunken laughter, thick with whiskey, and her blood turned to ice. "Open up, girl. I know you're in there." The voice slurred, familiar. "Billy." Amara clutched the blanket tight, stepping back toward the table. The pounding grew harsher. "Just a little fun. Old Henderson ain't here tonight." Her heart seized. He knew Samuel was out at the stables. Outside rain battered, hinges screamed as the door shook. She reached for the knife on the table, but her sweat-slicked hands trembled too much. The door burst wide. Billy lurched in, reeking of liquor and wet earth. His eyes were clouded, his mouth twisted into a cruel grin. "Come on now. Don't fight." He staggered closer, each step heavy. Amara backed away until her spine struck the counter. No room left. She clutched the knife, lips quivering, but her strength was no match for his. When his hand shot out to seize her shoulder, a voice thundered through the house, sharper than the storm itself. "Stop!" They froze. In the doorway stood Samuel, drenched to the bone, rifle in hand. The firelight cast his face in shadow, his dark eyes blazing. Billy stammered, I was only—" Silence. Samuel's words cut like steel. "Get out of my house." The rifle's barrel leveled at Billy's chest, steady as bedrock. Lightning flashed outside, throwing Samuel's silhouette tall and unyielding across the wall. Billy stumbled back, cursed under his breath, and staggered into the storm, the door slamming behind him. The knife slipped from Amara's fingers, clattering to the floor. Her whole body shook, tears spilling as the tension broke. Samuel slammed the door shut, dropped the bolt, then turned. He crossed the room, eyes scanning her. Amara tried to stand firm, but her shoulders quivered. Setting the rifle aside, Samuel stepped close. His hand, roughened by years of work, settled gently on her shoulder. The weight was warm, steady, enough to still her trembling. "You're safe now," he said, voice low, certain. Amara lifted her gaze. In his eyes, beyond the anger, there was a rare tenderness, a vow that as long as he drew breath, no harm would touch her. She nodded through tears, leaning into that presence. Outside, wind howled and rain pounded. But in that moment, Amara felt peace. Not because the storm had passed, but because his hand rested on her, holding her steady. And in that night of thunder and fear, a small flame kindled within them both, the first spark of trust. The storm left behind a vast stillness, heavy with the scent of wet earth and rotting wood. Around the ranch, shingles lay scattered from the porch, the yard churned to mud, yet the house itself stood firm, its hearth casting a warm, golden glow. Amara sat on the edge of the bench, wrapped in wool, though the trembling in her chest had not yet eased. Samuel returned once he had made certain the door was barred. He said nothing, only stripped off his soaked coat and hung it on the hook. His figure looked worn, yet steady as ever. He saw Amara huddled there, her dark eyes shining as if trying to hide the fear still clinging to her. Quietly, he crossed to a cupboard and drew out an old cotton dress, its fabric faded with time. His voice dropped low, as though speaking risked stirring his own ghosts. "This belonged to my wife. She is gone now. Perhaps it will fit you." Amara took it. Her fingers brushed the cloth, her chest unsteady. She stepped into the small room to change. In the dim mirror, the dress clung as if made for her, strange, unfamiliar, yet carrying the weight of belonging. When she returned to the hearth, Samuel sat before the fire. He lifted his head at her approach. No words of praise left his mouth, no startled sound, yet his gaze lingered longer than usual. In the reflection of the flames, something unnamed stirred within his dark eyes. Amara settled opposite him. Neither spoke. Only the crack of kindling and the wind fading beyond the door filled the room. Her hands rested in her lap, steadying themselves. When Samuel passed her a cup of hot tea, his fingers brushed hers. The touch halted them both. They should have released, yet their hands remained. Warmth flowing slow, steady, like an underground current. Amara lifted her eyes to his, and for a long while neither looked away. She saw not only grief buried in him, but a hunger restrained too long. He saw not only the fear still etched in her, but the trust she had never known before. The tea tilted, sloshing unnoticed. Samuel's hand closed gently around hers. Amara did not pull back. In that weighted silence, something broke and something was born. Samuel rose, step by step, until he stood before her. Amara looked up, breath quickened, yet she did not move aside. His calloused hand lifted her face, rough but trembling. The kiss came like a confession long held in silence, first uncertain, then deepening, not a conquest, but a search, two souls long lost, finding one another again. That night, no words were needed. The fire bore witness as their bodies found each other. No clamor, no haste, but fierce and tender all at once. Amara trembled beneath the coarse strength of his hands. Yet fear gave way to something else. The certainty she was wanted, cherished, seen as a woman in her own right. For Samuel, it was the first time in years he let his heart open. He touched Amara not as a shadow to replace what was gone, but as the new breath of his life. Outside, the sky still hung damp with storm, but within another storm had passed, the one of grief, solitude, and doubt. In its place lay a rare peace, where two broken spirits drew breath from one another. As Amara curled into his arms, her eyes closed, her cheek pressed to his chest, she let herself listen to the steady thrum of his heart. That beat, slow and sure, told her she was no longer alone. And for Samuel, holding her close, he knew at last. For the first time in many years, the house no longer echoed empty. It carried the breath of life, of trust, and of a love just born, yet strong as the hidden springs beneath the desert. Dawn poured across the plains after the storm, washing the dust away and leaving a rare brightness. Rain from the night before still clung to the fence rails, glittering like glass in the early sun. In the ranch kitchen, the cast-iron stove burned red, spilling gentle warmth. Amara had risen early. She splashed her face with cold water drawn fresh from the well, her cheeks glowing not only from the chill of morning, but from something deeper, burning quiet within her chest. Her hands moved swiftly, kneading dough, pressing it flat for a batch of biscuits. Fat sizzled in the pan as slices of salted pork browned, the rich scent of coffee filling the air with life. Samuel stood in the doorway, watching. The sight of Amara in her plain dress recalled mornings long gone when laughter still echoed in this house. Yet the memory no longer struck him with pain. Instead, he felt something stir, renewal creeping into corners long dusted over. Each motion of hers, reaching for a ladle, brushing sweat from her brow, setting dishes on the table, brought a rhythm both gentle and sure. He spoke no word, only let himself watch in silence. A heart worn hard by drought and loss seemed to find a different beat, slower, warmer, edged with hope. When the small bell on the porch rang, signal for breakfast, the ranch hands filed in. They carried the scent of sweat and dust, the rowdy sound of men who had lived too long among grass and gun smoke. Yet this morning, their steps slowed when they saw the kitchen scene. Amara stood at the stove, hair tied neat, setting plates of biscuits and steaming beans on the table. For a moment, they hushed, not for lack of women in their lives, but because it had been so long since a woman's hand had given this house the warmth of family. Jake, the gray-bearded one, drew in a breath. By heaven, smells better than a town festival. Rough laughter broke out, but soon fell quiet as Samuel entered behind them. He needed no orders. His presence alone, his gaze resting on Amara, shifted the air. Billy, the one whose tongue had turned foul before, sat at the far end. He looked her way, but dared no word. Samuel's warning in the storm still burned in his ears. He bent over his food, sneaking glances, but dropped his eyes quick under Garrison's dark stare. The others, slowly, grew accustomed. They bit into crisp biscuits, drank hot coffee, and soon nodded their approval. Silent nods, murmurs of, "Like the old days," circled the table. One man muttered, "Feels like the ranch has life again." Amara heard, her cheeks warming, but she only smiled faintly and bent to her work. Samuel sat at the head of the table, watching all. He saw the change. By the simple presence of this young woman, the ranch, once dry and harsh, now breathed different. Even these rough men sat straighter, ate with more care, as if wishing to hold on to some better part of themselves beneath her quiet eyes. For a flicker, Samuel imagined, what if children's voices filled this kitchen one day? He shook the thought away, but the corner of his mouth curved with the trace of a smile. After the meal, when the men had gone to the fields, Amara stood at the wash basin scrubbing dishes. Samuel stepped beside her, towel in hand. They worked in silence, only the trickle of water and the morning light glinting off drops on her skin. When she turned, their eyes met. For a breath, the night before returned. Amara lowered her gaze, but Samuel's lingered. No words were needed. That look alone told her she was no longer merely a stranger given shelter. She belonged here, at least in his eyes. Outside, horses called. Wind swept the fence line. Men laughed as they drove cattle across the grass. Henderson Ranch seemed reborn with the morning light. But for Amara and Samuel, that dawn carried more weight. It marked a beginning, quiet yet strong, the beginning of a home taking shape. That afternoon, the prairie sky carried the pale gold of day's end. The ground still smelled of damp earth after the storm, puddles gleaming like shards of broken glass. In the ranch kitchen, Amara bent over the wash basin, rinsing the noon dishes. Water trickled, the stove's warmth still spread through the room. All seemed calm, until sounds drifting through the open window made her chest tighten. On the porch, a few ranch hands lingered, lighting cigarettes, trading words. At first, Amara caught only the familiar rough laughter and paid no mind. Then a voice rang out, clear, landing in her ears like a stone cast upon still water. "That colored girl, she's just trying to climb." Laughter erupted. Another voice, younger, chimed in. What else could it be? From the dirt one day, the main house the next. Anyone can see it. Amara froze. Her hands trembled in the cold water, apron soaked as a dish slipped, clattering against the basin. The laughter outside rolled on, but her ears rang. Blood rushed to her temples. Her heart pounded as though it would burst her chest. Those words were the same as every gaze she had borne all her life. The neighbors' stares when fever took her parents. The whispers when she begged for work in town. They flooded her at once, leaving her gasping. She dried her hands quickly, stepping out before tears could be seen. Skirting the stables, she slipped into the back garden, the place once tended by Martha, Samuel's late wife. It lay overgrown now, weeds past her knees, rose long withered, yet the ghost of a woman's touch lingered. Amara sank onto the wooden step, bent forward, pressing her face into her palms. Wind swept the yard, carrying the scent of hay and damp soil, but it could not lift the heaviness in her chest. She thought, perhaps it would be better to leave, before this bond grew too strong, before Samuel himself was dragged into scorn. Climb. The word dug deep, a cruel reminder she would always be seen as an outsider. The thought twisted her. Last night, in Samuel's arms, she had believed herself truly seen. Yet with a handful of whispers, faith cracked. She wondered, was Samuel truly different? Would he stand with her when the world turned against them? Footsteps sounded on wet ground. Amara looked up, startled, to see Samuel approaching. He did not hurry, did not demand, only came steady, his dark eyes fixed on hers. Amara. His voice was quiet, yet carried. She turned away, wiping at her eyes. I... I only needed some air. Samuel stopped before her, then lowered himself onto the step. He did not press, only let silence stretch for several heartbeats. Then his calloused hand rested on hers, rough with years, yet warm enough to make her tremble. I heard them, he said, each word slow, weighed. Out here, folk are quick to judge. They look at skin, at poverty, at anything that sets a person apart. But they don't know you as I do. Amara pulled back, then stilled, leaving her hand in his. Her voice shook. They think I want to use you for a place in this house. Samuel turned fully, meeting her eyes. His grip tightened, his gaze unflinching. You bear no shame for your color, nor your poverty. Not with me. Here you are no guest, no burden. Here you are the one I choose. The words rang in her chest like a bell. Amara lifted her head, eyes blurred with tears. For the first time in her life, someone had not only shielded her, but spoken it plain, that she was chosen, not pitied, not tolerated, chosen. Samuel. Her voice broke, splintered. His other hand lifted her chin, steadying her eyes on his. I lost my wife, my child. I thought my life was nothing but emptiness. But when you stepped through that door, I felt a home breathe again. No one has the right to call that climbing. It is life. And it is my choice Amara could not hold back. Tears streamed hot down her cheeks, yet carried relief. She pressed into his chest, sobs breaking free, as though casting off years of shame. Samuel wrapped her close, his hand running slow along her back, firm and steady. He offered no distant promises, only silence and the rhythm of his heart as proof. Beyond, the wind whispered through dry grass. But in his arms, Amara felt safe for the first time, safe in a way nothing could shatter. She looked up, eyes still wet, but lit with something new. Samuel brushed the last tear from her cheek, his gaze softened, a small smile breaking. Not bright, but sure. Their hands remained clasped, unyielding. In that moment, Amara knew the world might go on judging, but within Samuel's heart, she was already chosen, and that was enough to keep her standing, enough to keep her here. That evening, the wind lay still. A thin crescent moon hung in the sky, its silver light slipping through the window and scattering across the wooden floor in broken patches. The hearth still glowed with embers. Samuel sat heavy in his armchair, his broad shoulders swallowed in shadow, while Amara sat opposite on a smaller chair, her hands laced together in her lap. Silence stretched between them. Since the storm, it seemed a thread bound them, strong yet fragile. But tonight, Samuel carried another weight, solemn and grave, as though wrestling with something long buried. At last he spoke, his voice rough, gravel rolling in a deep well. Amara, there's something I've never told a soul. She lifted her gaze, dark and clear, waiting. Samuel drew a long breath, his eyes on the fire, though his thoughts reached years behind. My marriage, before. It wasn't what folks believed. They said my wife was kind, gentle. Truth is, there was never a fire between us. Only duty, responsibility, and days that bled into one another. His hand clenched the arm of the chair, knuckles whitening. I cared for her, yes, but not in the way a man ought to love a woman. I filled my place as husband, as father. Yet inside, there was always an emptiness. When Ruth died, that emptiness became a pit. I lived in it for years, thinking I'd never climb out. Amara's chest tightened. She knew how hard such words came. This was a man who rarely spoke much at all, rarer still of his wounds. She rose slowly and crossed the room. Samuel remained seated, his weary eyes braced for judgment. But none came. Amara knelt beside his chair, her small hand resting on his arm. There, a long scar showed plain, a wound from a horse fall years past. The skin had healed, but left its mark, rough and dark. Amara's fingers traced it, gentle, as if brushing dust from time itself. "I see you, Samuel," she whispered, soft yet steady. "Not just the ranch master, not just the widower. I see the man, with scars, with emptiness, and with longings you've never named." Samuel shivered under her touch. His eyes left the fire, finding hers. In their depths, he saw understanding that needed no speech, a woman who bore her own wounds, yet still chose to reach for his. Slowly, he laid his hand over hers. Her palm was warm, tender, yet strong. "With you," he faltered, searching. "I've found something I never had before. Not duty, not obligation, but desire and understanding." Amara smiled through the tears shimmering at her lashes, her gaze gentle yet unyielding. "I cannot replace anyone, but I can be here, with you." Her words fell light as petals, yet strong enough to scatter years of darkness. Samuel gave a faint nod, his lips trembling as though a burden long carried had slipped free. They stayed like that, he in his chair, she kneeling at his side, hands clasped, no further words needed. The moonlight streamed through the window, wrapping them in a hush that felt whole. Outside, wind stirred lightly across the fields, carrying the scent of damp grass and fresh earth. Inside, the fire cracked softly, its glow lighting the scar on his arm. But this time, it was no longer a mark of pain. It was the place where something new had begun, an unspoken vow. He would not bear the weight alone again. Rumor began like a wisp of smoke, then spread into a slow-burning fire across town. Whispers drifted through the saloon, sighs in the general store, even murmurs during Sunday service. "Old man Henderson, widower for years, now chasing after a colored maid." The words always dragged at the end, mocking, disdainful. Samuel heard it secondhand from men on the ranch, yet he never spoke of it. Amara tried to ignore it, but each scrap of gossip lodged in her mind like thorns. Whenever she passed an open window and caught laughter behind her, she knew the subject was herself. One morning, Samuel readied to ride into town for seed corn and supplies. As he led the horse from the barn, he saw Amara at the kitchen door, hair tied neat, eyes edged with unease. "Will you come with me?" His voice was even, as if there were nothing unusual in the asking. Amara faltered. Two feelings wrestled within her: longing to walk beside him, fear of the eyes that would follow. She pressed her lips tight, then nodded. The road into town was thin with dust, wheels of the wagon clattering. Samuel sat beside her, his hand resting loose on his knee. Yet now and again his fingers brushed hers, steadying her. The morning wind carried wild grass and red dirt, but it could not quiet the pounding in her chest. By the time they reached the square, market day was in full swing. Voices rose at produce stalls, fabric counters, the clamor of trade filling the air. Yet when Samuel and Amara stepped down from the wagon, the noise faltered. Heads turned. Eyes weighed them, sharp with curiosity, heavy with judgment. A few men whistled. Housewives leaned close, whispering behind hands. Children stared until mothers dragged them aside. Heat rose in Amara's face. She wanted to bow her head, but Samuel's hand closed firmly over hers. Rough, broad, unshakable, it lent her strength. "Lift your head, Amara," he murmured. She drew a breath, raising her gaze. Sunlight struck her dark face, made her eyes shine brighter. Samuel walked tall beside her, stride steady, his stare unflinching. He made no effort to hide, no trace of shame. Rather, his presence spoke plain. "This is my woman." At the grain stall, he greeted the seller in his usual deep tone, as though a dozen eyes weren't fixed upon them. Amara stood at his side, his hand still clasping hers. The vendor, a bald old man, hesitated, then stooped for the corn sacks. He said nothing, only kept his gaze away from Amara. Passing the fabric counter, a knot of women muttered loud enough to reach Amara's ears. "Shameless, that one. Who does she think she is?" "Poor Henderson, surely bewitched." Amara bit hard at her lip, but Samuel's grip tightened, steady. He leaned just enough to her ear. "Let them talk. We don't live by their words." Later, near the blacksmith's, a tall cowboy sneered, voice carrying. "Henderson, didn't think your taste ran so particular." His companions burst into laughter. Samuel turned. He did not draw steel, did not shout. His eyes locked the man's with a silence cold and proud. One by one, the laughter died. No one dared push further. Amara stood with his hand in hers, her heartbeat falling into rhythm with his. Calm, unyielding, defiant. By the time they returned to the ranch, the sun dipped west. Amara had been quiet all the way, but inside her thoughts churned. At last she looked at Samuel, his weathered face, his dark eyes still bright in the fading light. Why don't you care what they say?" she asked softly. His reply came steady as stone. "Because I know what I want. And I choose you." That's all. Tears welled in Amara's eyes, not of shame this time, but of pride. She knew the road ahead would be hard. Rumors clinging, perhaps worse yet, from the community. But as long as his hand held hers, she would walk it, head high. That night, in the warm kitchen, Amara stood at the fire while Samuel sat on the bench, his gaze resting on her every move. The world outside might still circle with its whispers, shadows pressing close. But inside this house, the small flame in the hearth was enough to light their tomorrow. And for the first time, Amara understood. True love was not hiding from judgment, but daring to stand together before it. Evening fell, painting the sky in pale shades of amber. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and damp earth from freshly plowed fields. In the ranch kitchen, Amara stood at the work table, kneading white dough with steady rhythm. Streaks of flour clung to her arms, even across her dark cheekbones, catching the last shafts of sunlight streaming through the window. The kitchen felt alive again. The stove glowed red, the first notes of fresh bread filling the air. mingling with the pop and crackle of firewood. Amara hummed a tune, low and warm, a song her mother once sang, now echoing against the timbered walls. The walls themselves seemed to listen, as though remembering laughter they had not heard in years. Samuel stepped in, boots heavy with dust. He halted in the doorway, silent, watching. The sight of the young woman bent over the table, hands patient, face calm, touched something long hidden in him. For years, this house had known only wind seeping through cracks. Now her voice gave it breath. Her presence gave it heart. He walked closer, though each step slowed as if weighted. Something pressed in his chest, urging him toward a choice he had never imagined making. Amara looked up, smiling softly. "You're back." "The bread will be ready soon," Samuel didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered, deep and unbroken, carrying the weight of what had been and what might yet be. Then, suddenly, he dropped to one knee before the table. Amara froze. Flour slipped from her fingers, scattering across the floor. "Samuel, what are you doing?" He had no ring. Only his scarred, calloused hands, worn by years of tilling soil and breaking horses. Hands that had held rifles, carried burdens, steadied storms. He held them out, voice low, firm, trembling with truth. "All I have is this land, and these hands. But if you'll have me, they'll be yours. Forever." The room fell silent. Even the wind outside seemed to still. Firelight cut across his face, revealing every line, every scar, every story. Amara raised a hand to her mouth. Her eyes brimmed, tears spilling bright. Never had she thought she would hear such words. Here in a kitchen, on an ordinary afternoon, without ring, without flowers, without rehearsed vows. Just hands and his eyes. Yet to her it was everything. She laid her small, flour-dusted hand into his rough palms. White powder clung to sun-darkened skin, a clumsy seal that bound deeper than gold. Her tears slipped down as her voice broke. "Yes, Samuel. I need nothing but you." Samuel bent his head, pressing his brow to the back of her hand. His eyes closed, breath shuddering like a burden at last lifted. "Thank you for choosing me," he whispered. Amara sank to her knees as well, so they were level. She wrapped her arms around him, chest against chest, listening to the pounding of his heart, strong, urgent, alive. They spoke no more, only held fast, as if to be sure neither would vanish. The fire crackled, louder, as though sealing the vow itself. Shadows danced across the walls, not as reminders of emptiness, but as witnesses to new life. The scent of bread swelled richer in the air, reminding them both that love, like dough, rises quietly when given warmth. For Samuel, the moment was both strange and familiar. He had stood at gravesides, spoken farewells with clenched fists and hollow eyes. He had walked through seasons where silence was his only companion. And now, kneeling on the worn kitchen floor, he felt the earth steady beneath him, as if the land itself approved. For Amara, this was the answer to years of wandering. She had once believed she was nothing more than a shadow moving through other people's lives, hired, dismissed, judged, forgotten. But here, in this man's arms, she was not invisible. She was chosen. They stayed there until the bread's crust browned, its edges crisping in the oven. At last, Samuel pulled back slightly, enough to look into her eyes. His thumb brushed away a streak of flour from her cheek, leaving behind a smear of warmth. "You've given me back something I thought I'd lost," he said. "A home, and a reason to keep building it." Amara smiled through her tears. "And you've given me what I never thought I'd find. A place to belong, a place to be seen." They rose together, fingers still entwined, and set the table in quiet companionship. When the bread came out, steaming and golden, they broke it between them, sharing as though it were holy. Perhaps it was. For in that bread, kneaded by her hands and blessed by his vow, lay the promise of days to come. Outside, dusk poured across the fields, draping them in honey-colored light. The last swallows dipped low over the barn, and cattle shifted in the corrals, calm at last after a long day. In that worn wooden kitchen, two souls once hollowed by loss found one another, sealed not by gold or grandeur, but by truth spoken in a humble room. Their vow was simple yet sacred, together for the rest of their days. And as the night settled, neither wind nor rumor nor time could undo what had been spoken. The wedding came when no one truly expected it. No invitations, no brass band, no church bells pealing across the plains, just a late summer afternoon in the old ranch house that had endured storms, loss, and silence. Samuel wore a plain white shirt, its collar frayed from years of use, and a pair of dark trousers. His silvering hair was combed neatly, though his rough fingers trembled as he fumbled with the knot of a tie he hadn't touched in years. Holding reins or a rifle had always been easier than tying cloth. In the kitchen, Amara was surrounded by the wives of ranch hands who had insisted on helping her prepare. They smoothed back her curls and fastened wildflowers from the roadside into a small crown above her head. Her dress was no silk gown, only the cotton one Samuel had given her months ago. Yet today, it became a wedding dress, for the light in her eyes was brighter than any veil. Outside, the ranch hands stood in rows, with a few neighbors gathered quietly. No crowds, no fanfare, just a handful of witnesses, enough to give weight to the vows. Elias, the foreman, cleared his throat and began the blessing, his voice rough but steady. Clouds gathered above them, heavy and gray. It had been months since rain had touched the parched earth. Now, as Amara took Samuel's arm and stepped onto the wooden porch, a single drop struck the dust and broke apart like glass. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "A blessing," someone whispered. The ranch fell silent as all eyes turned to them. The widower in his 40s, the black woman once treated as an outsider, now standing together. Their gazes met, steady and unashamed, sweeping away every sneer and whisper that had haunted them. Amara felt Samuel's hand tighten around hers as the vows were spoken. For better or worse, in sickness and in health, in wealth and in want. Her chest swelled, her vision blurred with tears, not out of fear, but because, for the first time, she had been chosen, and chosen openly. Samuel looked down at the woman beside him. Memories flooded him. Empty nights after his wife and child were gone. Winters that nearly crushed him. And then Amara had come. Not as a replacement, but as something wholly new. A home he thought he'd lost forever. When the vows ended, Elias nodded. Samuel leaned down and their lips met in a kiss, brief but enough to hush the crowd. In that moment, rain fell harder, drumming on the roof, soaking through their clothes. No one scattered. Instead, they smiled. Afterward, they gathered back in the kitchen, the same room that had witnessed Samuel's clumsy proposal, with nothing but his hands. A long table stood covered with a worn white cloth, holding simple food, baked bread, beans, smoked meat. Amara stood in the middle, gazing at the laughter and voices filling the space. Once this house had known only the whistle of wind through cracks. Now it was alive again. Samuel stepped behind her, wrapping his arm across her shoulders. He didn't need words. A single nod told her everything. We made it. Outside, the rain poured over the fields, soaking the thirsty earth. The promise of green grass and fattened cattle lay in every drop. The ranch would bloom again, nourished by love as much as rain. When the guests had left, only the fire and the sound of rain remained. Amara sat by the window, while Samuel joined her, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. I thought I would live out my days alone, he said softly. But you changed everything. Amara leaned her head against his shoulder, whispering, I thought I'd forever be the shadow at the edge of someone's life. But today I stood beside you. They fell quiet, breaths mingling, the steady rain washing the dust of drought away. And in that silence, both knew this was an ending and a beginning all at once. Their hearts spoke the vow no minister had uttered. On this harsh land, they had found not just survival, but a love strong enough to defy prejudice and time itself. On that unforgiving frontier, where summer winds carried red dust and winters froze the earth solid, Samuel and Amara had found one another, not in riches or grandeur, but in a humble kitchen, under a wooden roof, with rough hand and tender eyes. They had faced whispers, endured stares, outlasted scorn. And now, standing together beneath the first rain after drought, they became a living testament that love can bloom anywhere, that hearts hardened by loss can soften again, and that no matter the years, love always finds its way. On that harsh land, where summer winds carried red dust and winters lay heavy with frost, Samuel and Amara found each other, not in riches or splendor, but in a small kitchen, beneath a weathered roof, with calloused hands and eyes that knew how to love in silence. They endured whispers, endured stares, endured cruel laughter, yet still stood together on the day rain fell after drought, a small miracle granted by the earth itself. Their story is not only the love of a man and a woman. It stands as proof that the human heart, though scarred by loss and hardened by judgment, can still be reborn when touched by honesty. At any age, true love can find its way, strong enough to bind two people hand in hand. Dear friends, if this story stirred your heart, share your memory. How did love first come to you, and what helped you hold it through the years? Let us remind one another that though time moves on, the heart never loses its warmth. Do not forget to like, to subscribe, and to share this tale with friends or family, so that many more may remember this truth. Love is never too late, and a home can be begun again at any moment. Thank you for walking this journey with us.